Hey guys, Seb here from VG247.com, and today we are taking a look at brand new gameplay from Nintendo's new game, or maybe not so new to some of our viewers, Zelda Link's Awakening. Here I am joined by our assistant editor at VG247, Alex Donaldson.
Hello there, hi everyone.
So Alex, I've completed Ocarina of Time, love that game. I've completed Breath of the Wild, which was just a triumph from a technical standpoint. I've not played any of the handheld titles, so as someone who's mainly had an interest in the big Zelda games, what kind of thing should I be expecting here? Is this a ground-up remake, or more of a remastering of sorts?
Well, it's really sort of it's sort of a little bit of both. So this is a complete remake of the game, but you know, remake has a funny meaning in these days, where you've got stuff like Resident Evil 2 and Final Fantasy 7, where they are the same story and the same characters and stuff, but it's a whole new game. This is more in the vein of a remaster, in the sense that this is an identical version, more or less, to the game that came out on Game Boy in the 90s, but they've completely remade it from the ground up to have modern visuals and made a few small changes to the way it plays and controls and stuff to make it more modern. But this is the same game that came out before, absolutely. Like, if you played it back in the day and you remember it, you'll remember the puzzle solutions, you'll remember the world map layout. Everything about it is identical in that sense. Okay, so in terms of like gameplay features, what kind of things are we going to be doing in this game exactly? In terms of what you do, for the people who didn't play the original, this is an old school traditional Zelda game. So this game came out around the same time as The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo, and it's most similar to that game. But if you've played the more modern Zeldas, you'll see that a lot of the tropes of the series that you're familiar with are present in this. You're going to different dungeons, and you're collecting items that are useful not only in the dungeons, but then once you leave a dungeon with an item, you'll be able to use that item in other places in the world to open up the world map more. You know, there's plenty of mini game stuff to do.
So there's a lot of travelling sort of back to areas you've been, unlocking new places, and, you know, retreading ground, so to speak.
A little bit. I would say probably there's actually a little bit less than most Zelda games, because this was a handheld game, because it was an original Game Boy game. So it can't be like Link to the Past is amazing for how you can sequence break it and how you can do the dungeons out of order, out of the intended order. This is not that sort of game. This is more, you do go from A to B to C, but you do have to use your head and think about, okay, I've just picked up this item, where else would this be useful? Because usually the item that you get in one dungeon will help you get to the area of the overworld you need to get to the next dungeon. Right. But it is that classic Zelda mix of puzzles, combat, and just exploration and adventure, really. It's that classic Zelda mix.
So in terms of difficulty, there is a fair amount of sort of brain activity you're going to have to engage in order to, you know, progress through this. The difficulty is coming from the sort of complexity of some of the challenges you've got to approach. Yeah,
definitely. And this is a game with some really interesting, weird, esoteric puzzles that are quite obtuse. And I was quite surprised to find a lot of those puzzles haven't been changed or adjusted or made easier. Now, It has been made easier in some places. A good example is there are doors that can be opened by throwing a pot at them, and in the original version of the game, that was just a door. It was just like a metal door. Whereas in this version, the door has a big old picture of a pot on it to tell you, hey, throw a pot at this door.
Pot here.
So they've made it a bit easier in some little touches like that. Yeah. But on the whole, because they've kept it, because they've been so
true to the original.
Yeah, exactly. So because they've been so faithful, it's got the difficulty and the challenge and the lateral thinking required that the original did.
Right, that's really good to hear. So in terms of quests and sort of missions, are we being sent to sort of collect 4 goat hides here? Are we what is the sort of gameplay loop in those terms?
It's that classic Zelda structure. So you start out and you basically the overarching mission of the game is there are 8 instruments you need to collect, and each instrument is inside a dungeon. But you can't reach the later dungeons without the items and skills and knowledge that you get from the previous dungeons. So really, you're going from dungeon to dungeon to dungeon. And from dungeon 1 to dungeon 2, for instance, the stuff you do in the overworld might only take 30 minutes. But from dungeon 4 to dungeon 5, the stuff you have to do in the overworld might take an hour and a half. So that's how sort of the dungeons remain more or less the same sort of broad length throughout the game.
Right.
the challenge ramps up in them, but they're all roughly the same size. But the stuff you do in the overworld gets more complicated as you go. And obviously there's side quests as well, and mini games and all that sort of stuff, so that's quite nice.
So you mentioned there is a sort of small amount of sort of backtracking to some places you've been before, and in dungeons, but how large is the map looking? Because I know it's sort of filled with a few sort of mini games and little things you can do.
It's a smaller overworld. Again, you've got to keep in mind, everything in this game comes with the context that it was originally a Game Boy game. So it's a smaller overworld, but one of the reasons that a lot of people love this game, and one of the reasons that it's commonly one of those games you hear that's mentioned as one of the best games in the Zelda series, is because I think of that compact nature. You know, the world really feels alive for a game that's so old and was made on such a rudimentary machine.
The graphics are looking quite impressive.
And then they've used the visuals. Yeah, they've used the power of the Switch to sort of, they've given it this new visual style. It's unlike any Zelda that's ever come before in terms of how exactly it looks. And the visual style, in my opinion, really fits what this game is about, and that will make more sense to people who've played and completed the old version than people who haven't. And something that we should mention is that there is one major addition to the game, which is the Dungeon Creator.
Oh, yeah.
So the Dungeon Creator is, like I say, it's their one big new addition to the game. And this basically lets you make your own Zelda levels, dungeons, and then you can, give them to friends and let friends try their hand.
Oh, so you can share these. So is that similar at all in function to Mario?
There's definitely not any online sharing, but I don't know if you can Wi-Fi them over to a Switch, using wireless transfer or anything like that, or if you literally just have to pass your Switch around, and that's important to note. This is no Mario Maker. This is not the moment when they have a Zelda version of that.
Yeah.
This is very rudimentary. What you're actually placing is you place rooms, templates. So every time you complete a dungeon, you will get the rooms from that dungeon. And then there's also tiles that can be found sort of, like you might find a tile in the crane game or in the fishing mini game and stuff like that, separate tiles. And then what you're doing is you are placing those tiles to sort of create a path through the dungeon. But let's say you've got a specific room that has a specific puzzle in it and a specific bad guy in it. That is what that room is. You can't take the bad guy out. You can't change the puzzle. So it's sort of a very rudimentary Dungeon Creator, but it is a fun little addition. And it does feel like, I hope, the first steps towards actually them putting out a Zelda Maker in the vein of Mario Maker, because I think that could be ridiculous. But it's a nice little bonus, at least. I don't think it's anything anyone's going to get too caught up on. But as always with this stuff, I do remind myself, the internet's crazy, and people will probably find some nuts
I'm sure they
things
will.
to do with that mode.
So in terms of performance as well, this is obviously a native Nintendo title. So is this a 60 frames per second game? Is this something you could sit back on your sofa with your Switch and play it on a large screen television?
Well, you can sit back with your sofa and play it on a large screen. I think it'll look fine. The fact that it has this art style that's sort of more toy-like, doll-like, really means it scales a lot better than some Switch games. Like if you scale the Switch version of Skyrim, of course it looks pretty rough on a 60-inch TV. This is going to scale a lot better than that. It's not a game that really needs the twitch reaction of 60 frames per second. It is a very relaxed sort of plodding game by design, the way the characters move and stuff like that. But what I will say is, because people might have seen videos, even on this channel, we had a video at E3 of me playing the game, and the performance back then was a little bit rough. That has been smoothed out. It runs great now in the final version. So, and that was my one concern going into this. So it runs fine, and it scales nicely up to the big screen, in my opinion, as far as the art style carries it through, right?
Yeah, it sounds like they've made a lot of nice quality of life additions to this.
Yeah. I mean, the changes from the original Game Boy version are really smart.
So ultimately, Alex, how big a thumbs up does this game get from you?
Thumbs all the way up. I absolutely love this game. It comes with the caveat that I did love the original. It's one of my favourite Zelda games. In fact, catch me on the right day and I might tell you it is my favourite Zelda game.
That's a pretty contentious statement there.
Well, no, I think there's a lot of people who feel that way. You talk to Zelda fans, and the ones you hear are Ocarina of Time, Link to the Past, this, and Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
Those are the ones you always hear, and that's with good reason. And this game definitely stands with those other ones. I think there'll be some people who prefer the original art style and stuff, and prefer to go back to the Game Boy Color version. But this is a faithful, respectful, good version of this game, so I can't recommend it enough. I think fans who played it back in the day will love it, and I think new fans will find it to be a really interesting, unique experience with a really clever sort of method to the way it tells its story as well.
Well, thanks for filling me in on that, Alex. That's looking quite interesting. I think I will actually check this out.
Yeah, it's really good. And if you want to read more about the game, do head to VG247.com. We've got a full review of the game, a written review if you want to read a more detailed description of what I feel about it. Also, there's a big old guide if you need help with some of those esoteric puzzles in the dungeons.
Fantastic. Well, we hope you enjoyed the video. As always, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you're new. We really appreciate it. And for everything else Zelda, make sure to head over on to VG247.com. See you soon.
Bye.